Hey everybody, in this video I've got a lot of floating shelves to build. My family's actually been after me for quite some time to get these made, but that gave me a good idea. What if I scale up my shelf design, show you what that looks like, and you know what you're getting yourself into. So, in this video I'm going to make 4 different versions of a floating shelf, starting from the most basic DIY version, all the way up to custom built-in shelves that you might design into a kitchen or pantry. Okay, I've got a lot of work to do, so let's get going. Shelf number 1 is going to be the DIY version. It's going to require the fewest number of tools or special woodworking skills. The board that I'm going to use to make the shelf is a 1x8 common pine board. It's going to be the cheapest and easiest thing for you to find. You could also use a 2x8 if you wanted to make your shelf a little bit beefier, or go with something like oak or maple, a hardwood. That's just going to be a little bit more expensive. A miter saw is going to make the quickest work of this, but a jigsaw or a circular saw and a square to use as a guide is going to get the job done as well if that's what you have. And if you know how long you want your shelf to be going into the purchase, most home centers will cut that board to length for you right in the store. All right, so now that I have mine cut, it's time to prep it for finish, which means sanding. It's always a good idea to sand, even if just a little bit, to remove any of the surface marks or factory markings from the board when you bought it. I would at least start with 80 grit sandpaper and then move up to 120 grit. You may even want to go to 180 for an even smoother feel. And if your board has sharp edges, you might also want to knock those front edges off, just so that you don't scrape yourself when you go to get something off the shelf, and it just gives it a little bit cleaner look. The easiest way to do this is you can just use your sander to take 3 or 4 quick swipes across the edge. Keep the sander moving, especially on soft pine, otherwise you're going to sand a divot right into the edge. A little bit better way to do it is with a palm router using either a roundover or a chamfer bit in it. This is going to be a bit quicker and give you a more consistent edge, but if you don't have a router, that's okay, just use the sander. To attach our shelves to the wall, we're going to use simple galvanized pipe fittings, and each bracket is going to be made up of a flange, an 8-inch length of pipe, this is also called a nipple adapter, and a pipe cap. And these all just screw together really easily and look like this when you are done. Now this is all 1/2-inch hardware, but you can also get 3/8 inch if you want a little bit thinner look, or 3/4 or even an inch if you want a little bit beefier look. If you want to leave them as is, that's fine, but I suggest painting them. My daughter wanted hers gold, so that's what I'm doing. All right, with my board cut, sanded, and the edges treated, it's time to move on to finishing. Now, I'm not going to focus on that process in this video because there are a ton of options. I'm going to be painting mine white. You can clear coat yours, stain it, whatever look that you're going for. So I'm going to go do that painting now, and then I'll meet you back for the install. Step 1, we're going to locate the studs in the wall.
Oh God, stud, hit the stud.
Or you could use one of these. It'll shine a light when it finds a stud. Huh. Well, I mean, it must be broken. I give it 1 star. Well, since technology's clearly let me down, I'm gonna go with this. This is called a stud buddy, and it works by using 2 strong magnets to locate the screws in your drywall. And wherever you find a screw, that's most likely where you're gonna find a stud. Once you find the stud, you can mark that location and then repeat that whole process, finding all the other studs that are going to be located behind where your shelf's going to be. To attach this to the wall, you're going to need at least 2 of these, but depending on how long the shelf is, you may need to add additional supports to keep it from sagging. These flanges that we're going to be installing have 4 holes in them, and you're going to want to make sure to use the top and bottom holes to fasten this to the wall because that's going to give you the best chance of making a solid connection with the stud. Once you have one installed, use a level to make the next bracket the same height. Then just repeat that process with the rest of your brackets. One good practice here is to make sure to utilize all the studs that are going to be located behind your shelf. That's just going to keep things nice and sturdy. And now I can set my shelf up here. One thing with these cheaper pine boards is they can get a little wonky on you. See how much this one wobbles? To solve for that, just use these U-shaped straps to fasten the shelf to the support. This is going to keep the shelf from sliding off the bracket and keep the shelf flat and looking nice. One thing that you may not like about the basic version of the floating shelf is having those brackets visible underneath the shelf. But what if we can move those brackets from under the shelf to inside it and make it look more like a true floating shelf? For this version, we need to abandon the thin shelf board and go with something that's at least 1.5 inches thick, like this maple board. I'll do the exact same prep work that I did on the first shelf, cutting it to length, sanding it, and softening the edges. Then I'm going to apply a water-based finish that's very natural looking and pretty durable. Now comes the new part, because this is going to be our shelf bracket. This one is from a company called Shepherd Brackets. It's one of my favorites to use, mainly because it's got all of these places along the edge that you can sink a screw and make sure that you have the best chance of hitting all the studs that you can, while still giving you flexibility to place your shelf where you want it on the wall. I really like that feature. And these bars are welded into this, so this is going to be super strong and hold a really good amount of weight. But these bars need to go into the back of the shelf, and to do that, that means we're going to have to drill some pretty deep holes. To make these holes, I'm going to need to use a pretty big drill bit, and I like to use the ones from Wood Owl. This is a 13/16 inch drill bit, and it's going to connect right to my handheld drill. First, I need to locate where these holes are going to go, and to do that, I'm just going to use the bracket itself to mark them out. I need to mark the center line of the board, and then just drop the bracket right on top and mark those locations. And to help make sure you get the bit started straight, the bracket comes with this guide. I'm just taking my time drilling these out a little bit at a time, making sure that I clear the shavings. I also have a piece of tape on the bit to act as a flag so that I know when I reach my desired depth and don't risk blowing through the other side of the shelf. This maple is pretty hard, but if you're using a 2x8 or other pine board, this is going to go much faster. And once I have all my holes drilled, I can test the fit. So if I wanted to, I could go ahead and install this no problem, but it would leave a gap between the shelf and the wall where this bracket is. And if I wanted that to be truly seamless, then what I need to do is cut a small recess in the back of the shelf. That way this bracket can sit inside it and the shelf can make contact with the wall. The best way to create this recess is to mark out around the bracket and use a router bit or a table saw to cut it out. And now when I add the bracket back in, it's going to sit inside that recess, which means that the shelf can sit flush with the wall. Okay, to install this, you're going to use your favorite stud finding method to locate all the studs behind the shelf. Anchor the brackets to the wall using at least 2-inch screws and level it to make sure everything is, well, level. Yeah, well, looks like my next video is going to be on how to patch drywall. Maybe if I use 2 hands? Now just slide the shelf onto that bracket and try not to smash that through the wall too. And gently apply the level. Yep, level as a devil. Now that is a truly seamless floating shelf. I really like the way that shelf turned out. I think it looks amazing, and I think it works really well in small scale applications like maybe adding some books or plants. But sometimes you want to make a shelf that's a little more beefy, either to cover a larger area or to carry some heavier items. And to do that, I'd switch gear and go with a box shelf. Like the name says, these shelves are made by constructing a hollow box rather than relying on a single board. The hollow box then slides over an inner framework or bracket, which you can attach to the wall to support your shelf. The key to making this method is to create the front-facing edges out of solid wood and create almost an edge banding effect with this little spacer in the middle that helps you define how thick your shelves are going to end up being. And by doing this, you can use a cheaper material like plywood to create the top and bottom of the shelves, because those plywood edges are going to be hidden from sight. To make the front edge, I used my table saw to create a rabbet along each edge like this. And I made the exact same cut on both sides. On the last path, I tilted my blade by 2 degrees, and that's going to create this slight angle, which does 2 things for me. It makes sure that this top edge will make solid contact with the plywood without interference. Also, when I go to glue this up, it's going to encourage most of the glue to go down into this small pocket and not squeeze out all over the outside of the shelf. Then I need to wrap this around the front edge of the box, and to do that, I'm sneaking up on that mark and then checking the fit and repeating that process as needed. And then they fit together like this. But before I go to glue this up, I'm going to show you how to make the brackets that go inside. I'm just going to cut a 2x4 into 1 long strip and 5 smaller support pieces. Now I can fasten each of the short pieces at even spacing along the long piece using 2 screws in each one. One thing to remember to make all of this work properly is that the thickness of the support bracket needs to match the thickness of the spacer on the inside of the front trim piece, and that way everything is going to fit together properly. And it also means I can use the bracket as a support when I build the box. To begin construction, just grab the front trim piece and add a little glue to both of the rabbets, and then set that rabbet on the edge of the bottom plywood piece. Then line up the mitered edges. And the other plywood piece should just fit inside the rabbet at the top. Once I have all sides in place and I'm happy with all the joints, I go ahead and add clamps. Lots of clamps.
He's more machine now than man.
And out of all those joints, this was the only squeeze out that I got. Just a tiny bit of schmutz. Here, let me get that for you. And once the glue is dry, I can clean up these edges. I make sure everything is sanded smooth and those edges look crispy crisp. Even with all those clamps, I still had this small gap on the long edge. This is a simple fix though, just add a dab of glue and rub it into the joint. Then grab your sander and give that a few swipes and that small gap's gonna disappear like it never happened. And if you run into a hairline gap on the mitered edge, just grab a screwdriver and roll those fibers over and that gap's gonna close up. Once I paint this, it'll look perfect. And through the magic of editing, I have one painted shelf ready for install. Installing this bracket is exactly like installing the metal shepherd bracket. Just find the studs, level it, and anchor the bracket to the wall. Once that's done, I can just slide the shelf over the bracket and secure it to the bracket with screws. This is 6 inches deep and 2.5 inches thick, but with box shelves you can go much deeper in both directions. I've made chunky fireplace mantles using this same method. Alright, so now that you've seen the basics of building a box shelf, I'm going to turn this all the way up and show you how to do this in a custom built-in application. Here in my pantry, I've been slowly remodeling and adding storage options, and I'm down to the final part of this project, which is adding a set of wraparound shelves above this countertop. Not only do they wrap around this whole side of the pantry, but they're full 11-inch wide shelves that are going to need to hold a decent amount of weight. And I also added some bling and put LED lighting on the bottom of this lower shelf to brighten things up. And to make all this happen, I just need to add a couple extra tricks to what I've already showed you. So far in this video, I've surface mounted my floating shelf brackets through the drywall and into the studs. And that's fine for shelves of that size, but as the shelves get bigger and you put more weight on them, that can create a good deal of leverage, which could cause the bottom of the shelf to crush the drywall, causing the shelf to sag over time. To get around this and create the strongest possible connection, I'm actually going to remove a thin strip of drywall all the way around so that I can have direct access to the studs. So to make this happen, I'm actually going to use a laser level to establish where my cut line is, and then just use a utility knife to work my way across the room. You can also use a multi-tool or a drywall saw to do the same thing. So this isn't hard to do, but it does make a lot of mess with all the drywall dust, so just make sure to cover anything below it so that you don't have a huge mess to clean up later. And then I'm going to raise my laser line by 1.5 inches and repeat. Unless you hit a stud with a screw in it, the drywall pulls right off pretty easily. Just make sure to clear any debris away that's going to interfere with the shelf brackets to come. And then do all that again for the second shelf. While I have this opening in the wall, it's actually a really good time to go ahead and fish the power cable for the LEDs down through the wall and out to the power source. I used a fish tape to run the patch cable down through the wall and just to the right of that power outlet you see. I cut a hole down there and added one of these cable management wall plates. To build the support brackets for these shelves, I'm going to upgrade from a 2x4 to hardwood. This red oak is going to give these brackets a lot more strength and rigidity. Everything's still going to be 1.5 inches, and I'm building these the exact same way with the exception of adding a second long strip on the outside of the bracket. For the most part, you want to space these small support pieces out evenly, but you'll most likely need to shift them 1 inch or so to the left or right if they're going to interfere with a stud location. One thing you should definitely do is pre-drill all these holes because this wood is a lot more dense than the pine. It'd be real easy to snap a screw. Oh look, I made fire.
Okay.
To determine the size of each bracket, I took the final dimension of each shelf and subtracted 1.5 inches from the length and width. And each level of shelving is going to be made of 2 side shelves and 1 long center shelf, and each one of these is going to get its own bracket. And also, while I'm here in the shop, I'm going to go ahead and drill some through holes into the brackets, which is just going to allow me to thread the power lines through to control the LEDs. The 2 holes will make sense soon enough. Okay, back to the pantry. These brackets should just slip into the cuts that I made in the drywall and touch the studs. Then I can make a mark on the brackets where the studs are located so that I can pre-drill and then sink the screws. I'm using 4-inch screws here, and I've got to drive them by using a right angle drill adapter because there's not enough room in here to use a straight bit. I'm doing the brackets on the side first because it makes sense where the studs are located in the walls. Your situation may be a little bit different, and so you can adjust how these brackets go together and connect to the studs in the wall. Once I have the middle bracket screwed in, then I can tie that to the side brackets. That way everything is one solid structure and I'm allowing all the studs to do the work of carrying the load together. Okay, so the method of building this out is going to be pretty much the same way as building the other box shelf that I did, but I'm going to do everything right here on site on the brackets piece by piece. The long top panel gets fastened to the brackets using screws or brad nails. And the bottom panel is going to be the same, but first I need to add the LED strips. My LEDs are going to be held inside these aluminum tracks that fasten to the underside with clips. These tracks are going to protect the LEDs from any kind of damage. Now I can lay the first LED strip into place, and these have an adhesive backing on them, so they're pretty easy to install. Because this LED strip is 16 feet long, I'm going to cut it to length right at these copper terminals. That's going to allow me to run a second row of LEDs for even more light. Now, to solve the problem of connecting these back together, they make these little jumper wires that have these plastic clips that clamp onto those copper terminals, so it's like this is one long strip of LEDs again and can be run off of one power source. All right, moment of truth. Let's see if this worked. Plug in the power source. Ooh, got some glowing button. Let's see. Yeah! That's awesome. Ooh, that's bright too. Damn. I can add these diffuser strips, which is going to soften the light as well as protect these LEDs from damage. And the rest of this is just cable management. So to start, I need to make a hole on one end that's going to allow that power connector to go inside the shelf. And I'm also going to add another hole for the touchpad on-off switch. And once I have the bottom installed, I'm going to go ahead and run that power connector through the hole and into this cavity in the shelf. Then I can add the control unit that's going to provide all the functionality of the lights, and then I can add the on-off switch. And then I can grab that power extension cable coming through the wall and run it back to the switch. Right now is a good time to go ahead and test that all the lights are working as planned before I continue with the install. Haha! Love it when a plan comes together. The side shelves go on next, and I went ahead and pre-assembled these in the shop. These are made the same way as I made the first box shelf, the only difference being that one of the sides is open-ended so that it can connect to the back shelf seamlessly. Those just slide over the brackets and get nailed into place. I made sure to pay attention to those seams before I added the nails to make sure everything was nice and tight and flush. And the last step is to add the front edge banding to the middle. I decided to make this a friction fit install because I want to have access to the electronics inside the shelf in case something goes wrong down the road and needs to be replaced. Then I can repeat that entire process all over again, minus the LEDs, to create the second set of shelves. These turned out amazing. I love the clean look, and after loading these up, they're proving to be just as strong as they are beautiful. And the LEDs, well, I love those too. That's going to eliminate any dark spots underneath the shelves.
That's all I have to say about that.